Hi, I'm Nat Swift, and I wanted to share with you something that I've written. So, by popular demand, which I think was 3 people voting for it, which, let's be fair, is pretty cool, this is a short story that I wrote called Blue Skies. I'm just going to read the first part of it for you today. This is included in the Accidental Time Travelers Collective, Volume 1. So here we go. This is Blue Skies by Nathaniel Swift. That's me. The wind whistled past Eddie's ears and raced across his goggles as he looked down. About 2.5 miles below, a rough patchwork of farms, fields, and baseball diamonds looked back at him. He imagined kids in the middle of a game, the pitcher pausing mid-delivery to look up and wonder just what the heck those old guys were doing up there. "You're doing great, Eddie," his instructor, whose name he couldn't remember, shouted over the roar of the wind in the plane's engine. She wasn't an old guy at all. None of the instructors were. "You can take your clip off if you're ready." He looked up. The carabiner at the end of his safety line was still clipped to the pole that ran along the ceiling of the small plane. One of his hands held tightly on the line, the other held onto the homemade charm necklace Annie had given him this morning for luck. It was full of pink and glitter, and Eddie had felt foolish wearing it earlier, but he was grateful for it now. He put it back in the pocket of his jumpsuit and zipped it safely away. He tried to back up a few steps, forgetting for a moment that his instructor was attached to his back for the tandem jump. She took a step back with him, and then planted her feet. Eddie stepped forward again. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he had promised Dave. They all had. He looked at Dave and offered a nervous thumbs up. Dave grinned back, loving every second of this. He shouted something that no one could hear and clapped a couple of times. Eddie and the others clapped back. Dave unhooked his clip, gave a sloppy salute, and then he and his instructor disappeared through the open door. "Happy birthday, you lunatic." The rest of them looked around at each other, 4 middle-aged men with thin hair and big bellies, trying to remember how they had ended up here. It was Dave, of course. It was always Dave. Every 5 years he gathered them all together, and every time it was an adventure. They had all expected the Big 5-0 to be something spectacular, but they didn't expect this. Eddie thought Dave was kidding when he first suggested it. "Aren't we a little too old to start skydiving?" he had said with a laugh. But Dave didn't kid about adventures. And Eddie couldn't say no, even though Annie was almost 10 now. And maybe he shouldn't be attending death-defying birthday parties anymore. But he had signed up, waived his rights to sue anybody, and sat through a half-hour of training. Apparently, that was all it took for some company's legal team to decide you're ready to jump out of an airplane. Austin, always quick to follow Dave's lead wherever it went, jumped next. Mark said something quickly and quietly, probably a prayer. He and his instructor followed suit a few seconds later. Eddie looked at Jeff, who was usually the last to commit to the craziest of Dave's ideas. Jeff looked a little sick. "Are you going to be okay?" Eddie shouted. Jeff tried to smile and gave Eddie a weak thumbs up. "I'll be right behind you." Jeff's instructor nodded, and Eddie looked down through the open door. Human beings, friends of his, were falling through the air below them. This is nuts. Okay, let's do it. A black and white goose flew by the plane, looking at the open door with curiosity. Eddie thought for a moment that it might just fly right in. Eddie took his clip off the pole. He walked with his instructor, awkward contestants in a 4-legged race, to the open door. He thought for a moment about grabbing onto something, anything, to stop this crazy thing from happening, but he felt the comforting weight of Annie's necklace in his pocket, and the feeling passed quickly. They jumped. The plane was suddenly gone. There was nothing but spinning clouds and the ground far, far below. Eddie could feel his instructor shift her body to slow the spin, and he tried to relax his body to help her. The sky was everywhere and everything, and the world he had always taken for granted was so far away. "I'm not on it. I'm looking at the whole damn world, and I'm not on it." Eddie laughed. He wondered where Annie was down there, and if she was watching him. His instructor was struggling to shout in his ear. Even though she was only inches away, he could barely hear her over the roaring wind. He had learned the hand signals they used to communicate while diving, so there shouldn't be any need to shout. Something must be wrong. I can't. pain in my whole arm feels like you need to release the... She coughed a couple of times, and her head dropped forward. Eddie couldn't turn around to see her, couldn't tell what had happened, but he knew. She was dead. Eddie's heart and mind were both racing. What now? He was strapped to a dead woman, free-falling through the sky, about 15,000 feet above the ground. Allison. Her name was Allison. They didn't cover this in the 30 minutes of training. The first thing was to release the clips that held the two of them together. That must have been what she was trying to tell him. Then he'd be able to use his own emergency parachute and let Allison fall to the ground. He started to unscrew the first clip. "You don't want to do that," Allison said. Eddie screamed. "Sorry to startle you. I'm not Allison." Eddie screamed again. "Right. I'm Trevor 14, and I'm from the future. I won't say how far yet. I know it's a lot to process already. This whole thing is a mess." Eddie stopped screaming. The wind was oddly calm. Below him, he noticed 3 parachutes opening, puffs of white against the greens and browns of the earth. 3? Shouldn't there be 4? "Anyway, you don't want to do that. You don't have a..." Trevor 14 stopped as something buzzed by Eddie's ear, reminding him of the buzzing noise at the top of the tree in those Winnie the Pooh stories Annie had always made him read to her. But this wasn't bees, or whatever it was at the top of that tree. This was a bullet. And after whizzing right by Eddie's ear, it planted itself into Allison's forehead. Or Trevor 14's forehead. Or whoever it was that Eddie was still attached to. Blood gushed from a hole in the back of her head. His head? And floated in midair, keeping pace with Eddie and Allison as they fell. Eddie screamed again. What the hell just happened? Whatever happened, he was still falling, and he was still attached to a now twice dead body. He tried to ignore his screams, which seemed to belong to someone else, and opened the pair of clips that were supposed to keep him safe. Allison's body drifted away, but not before giving Eddie a much better view than he wanted of her disfigured face. He unzipped the pocket that held his emergency parachute ripcord and gave it a tug. Nothing happened. He gave it a much harder tug. Still nothing. Parachute. That's what Trevor whatever was about to say. You don't have a parachute. The ground below, which had looked this whole time like it wasn't getting any closer, suddenly started rushing toward him. Eddie wasn't sure if he was still screaming or not. He was thinking of Annie, loving her desperately, hoping she wasn't watching anymore. If I ever get the chance to do this again, I am going to pass on the skydiving party, thanks very much, Dave. Or at least remember to use Allison's parachute. I'm sorry, Annie. Goodbye. Luckily for him, for everybody, really, Eddie was gone before his body hit the ground. I'll stop there. If you're interested, you want to keep reading, I'll put a link to The Accidental Time Travelers Collective Volume 1 down in the comments below. I'll put a link to Volume 3 also, where I have a companion short story called From Now On, where we see the same story from Annie's point of view. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.